Let me just do a quick intro and we'll get straight in. Thanks for having me today. Like all good sessions, we often get these technical kind of glitches. So I'm Angie, and Nadara and I have known each other for far too long to mention. And we were talking quite recently about culture. And Nadar said, why don't you come along and talk to the community and share some of your learns and observations? And I'm happy to do that for the next half an hour or so. We're certainly not going to spend an hour working through these slides. Please do put stuff in the chat, ask questions as those thoughts come to you. Don't save things up. This should be as interactive as possible. I do have a tendency to be quite talkative and verbose, and it is a topic I'm massively passionate about. So do stop me in my tracks if there's something you particularly want to linger on. All questions are welcome. So that's me, look, in the middle with my woolly hat on. I am joining you from the Northumberland coast. So I am about 35 minutes north of Newcastle. And the second image that you can see underneath me in my woolly hat is an icon for the Ink Spot Craft Ale Bar, which was a community-minded craft ale bar that my husband and I set up just over 5 years ago, which was a true agile experiment in setting a culture from the word go. So as well as lots of other experience, in most recent years, that was something that we had a lot of fun with. So I'll probably be talking about the ink spot at some point. So let's crack on then. I'm not going to do a massive rambling introduction into who I am and run through my CV. But what I would say is that there are 3 parts to the Angie triangle, as described here. So really my purpose settles in the middle of this triangle. I'm really consumed with, fascinated and interested in helping creating the leaders and environments that we deserve. So I've worked independently for 10 years now. It probably took me 3 or 4 to settle on that line and that purpose when I started to understand the kind of thread that wove through my work. So there are 3 things that keep me busy in these little red dots: coaching and advisory for all sizes of enterprise, from solopreneurs up to corporate giants. So I've worked in every setting with every size of team. The second bit is the wow stuff, ways of working. So I spent a long, happy career in Barclays and was one of the first product owners in Barclays about 15 years ago. So I was at the sharp end of the agile movement, which was a very happy time for me. So I have walked in your shoes. I've got the moccasins. I've been the leader that's trying to create or change a culture. And then finally, the OD stuff, organizational development. So I help advise, devise, and run programs that really are about creating organizations that we can be proud of across the employee life cycle and journey. So that's me. So here's a bit of a quote to kick us off then. The only thing of real importance is for leaders is that they create and manage culture. So Ed Shine, you'll probably know his work from Humble Inquiry, which is a really kind of seminal book on leadership. So that's a really interesting, provocative statement on the role of a leader. One of the main things that we have to do is to create and manage it. But what is culture? You know, what do we think culture is?
We can't see your slide.
Oh, you can't see my slide.
I mean, we can see it says personal reflections and possibilities, but we don't see the Ed Shine quote.
Oh, okay. Having all sorts of fun things happen today, aren't we?
Yes, we are. And it's not in presentation mode. Maybe it's the other screen that you want to share.
Oh, you can't see this.
I can see it says creating positive cultures, personal reflections and possibilities. Your photo and the ink spot logo.
Do you want to pop the slides up, Nadar? I really don't understand the technical difficulties I'm having today. Let me stop sharing.
Let me get the slides and do.
Great, we've got you, Nadar. I think you might be on mute.
So you can see,
Yeah, we can see. That's
uh,
brilliant. We can see and we can hear you.
good. I'm going to go on mute. You tell me which slide you want be on, and I will go down.
Okay. Okay. So I think that we've probably given people 2 or 3 minutes to reflect on what culture is. So, today's topic is around um positive cultures. How do we support and generate positive cultures? And, as a reminder there, Ed Shine, whose work, I hold in huge regard, offers a provocative question there. What does it mean to create and manage culture? So, a really interesting one for us to think about. What I said I'd do today is offer some of my reflections over the last kind of 25 years of being obsessed with culture, leadership, and employee experience. So the next slide really kind of offers some of those lessons, and we'll unpack those a little bit. So let's move on to the next slide, Nadar. That would be great. So 7 points. No particular reason why there's seven. Any more than that would be a bit crowded on the screen. There's no magic around the number seven for me. So yeah, over the last 25 years, what have I come to realize? Maybe the stuff on the left in the red is lessons that are quite entrenched for me, or things that I really believe. And then the stuff on the right-hand side, the green numbers 5 through 7, are probably more recent things. And I wanted to share with you part of that journey where I'm at as you would probably say, a fairly experienced practitioner. What's the more recent stuff or the changes globally that I'm really reflecting on when it comes to culture? So let's have a quick skip through these then. So culture is what we do. Interestingly, when I'm engaged by leaders and organizations, there's still a sense that culture is a bit of a dark art, that it's quite hard to pin down. How can we change culture? It feels like a mist or a cloud, but that's absolutely not my view. My view is culture is something that we can see, touch, and feel, and therefore it can be built, dismantled, altered, changed, and rearranged. Um, you know, it's the things that we do, it's the things that we observe. And that's quite often my starting point when I have a conversation around culture. Start with something really small and start to observe what's really going on in an organization. I think it moves it away from this mystical art into something that is really practical and observable. So number two, I love the fact that HR, and I am an ex-HR person myself, are starting to kind of reject the HR title and instead think about people excellence, people ops, that kind of stuff. Culture isn't an HR task. No doubt you'll have a RACI model and somebody needs to be accountable for pieces of work within your people experience. But, again, often I'll go along to teams or to meetings or for pitches, or in fact, I've already started with a business and they wheel the HR person in, the only person that can really answer the following questions. What do people complain about here? What does your pay structure look like? How would you describe your EVP? Those kind of things. And all the leaders look towards the HR person. We need to break that somehow. Culture is co-owned by all of us. It's messy and it's emergent. Number three, leadership makes or breaks our experience. Leadership, direct or indirect. And leadership for me is quite simply how we use our influence for good outcomes, is really what makes or breaks experience. And again, thinking more recently about, again, a personal reflection for me, how do we move to an adult relationship? So rather than creating an experience that we do to people or empowering people, what does it look like when it's more adult rather than parent child? And again, maybe old-fashioned HR departments kind of hang on to that. But how do we really talk to people on a participatory equal level? I think it's a really interesting topic. Number four, my pet hate is when people talk about when thinking about an organization or a culture, they suggest or talk about simply inverting the pyramid. So turning the relationship around so that senior leadership suddenly becomes less important or has less say or less voice than those that are more junior, that are customer facing. Whatever way you look at it, you're still talking about hierarchy and you're still talking about pecking order. So I don't like to talk about the pyramid, whether we're going to have it the right way up or upside down. What I'm really interested in is what's in the heart of that pyramid, which is collaboration and community, working together for the good of the organization and the people that you serve. So stay away from the pyramid piece. So 3 more recent reflections then. So I spent some time at the beginning of the year training with Peter Block in a really small cohort on a course called Leader as Convener. And it's a piece of work I've been attracted to for a number of years. And it starts to talk about culture as belonging. So rather than culture as being around performance, which is probably where I used to sit, I used to kind of think about culture being a way to engender performance, again, for the clients and community that you serve. I've started to think more and guide my work around culture about being a place of belonging. And if you think about a culture or a place that you've been where you've really felt that you belong, it probably extrapolates out that the culture was really, really positive one for you. So relationships and relatedness are what matter and what generally create results. Number 6, people are free to choose. Quite a hard one for me, you know, a leader that was kind of made in the 80s where, you know, command and control was the model. And also, you know, some of my unintended diminishing behavior of controlling a program, shaping a program, delivering outcomes, and then kind of walking away. I've come to realize, probably since COVID, that people are free to choose how they engage with the culture and that we'll never truly have control over people and an organization. So culture is not doing to people, it's more of an invitation to participate. So these aren't necessarily a kind of a binary shift from a left to right, but they're really where my mind's been going and how I've been changing my work. And then number 7, so as part of the triangle of work that I engage with, I coach around strengths and modern servant leadership. And what they share in common is that they start with what's right. So when you think about culture or employee experience, focus on the possibility, not the deficiency. So I always look for what can we enhance in an organization or a team or even in an individual leader? What can we protect and grow? Start with really uncovering what's working well, because there will be stuff, and how do we grow from there? So they're my kind of key 7 kind of lessons and maybe myths over the last 20 or so years. I think if we'd started time, we might be able to break out and have some chat about this, but I think maybe we'll just treat these as provocative questions and ponderances for you to take away. Let's keep going then. Let's move on. Okay, so I mentioned the C word. I think I mentioned the COVID word, and you know the awful pandemic that consumed our lives 3 or so years ago. And that really created a new reality for us and a new expectation in workforces worldwide. You know, amazingly, overnight, we were able to shift 65% of all workers to work at home. I'm not saying that that was easy or that it was massively productive or straightforward, but things that we'd found difficult or imagined as impossible overnight happened. And, you know, with COVID came a change, really, a multiple change around what we wanted out of work and the demands that we started to make of each other and our employer. So here's a question for you then, when we start to think about how our expectation has changed. The question that's in the middle of the screen. Just think for, you know, 10 seconds. Imagine your best working life possible. Would you prefer a job where work and life are separate, that you're able to do your hours and log off, only to do your work within those hours and to finish at a set time and to have your evening and your weekends completely free, completely separate from the work that you do? Or would you prefer a life where work and life are blended through your day? And so typically where you are flexible on your start time because of family or caring responsibilities, or you need to put the washing on in the middle of the day, or like me, maybe you prefer to work in the evening. You're more of an afternoon and evening person, and your brain just works more that way. You like to ruminate and be creative and brainstorm, or even just do quiet, deep work in the evening, which, maybe doesn't work with a standard working pattern. Which of those, do you prefer? Yes, and lovely to see some stuff coming in on the chat. Flexible working that respects, people more broadly. Interestingly, when 5,000 people were sampled on this, the answer was pretty much 50-50. So there are a range of things that our people are looking for. Now, pre-pandemic, if that question was asked, I think that percentage would be completely different. We probably wouldn't even consider that we could work in a different way. So all of a sudden through COVID, the possibilities were endless. And actually now only 4 out of 10 people have returned to working in a workplace any more than 3 days a week. We're still left with a global workforce that's entirely hybrid and whose expectations have changed. So with that, the employee experience and the cultural landscape needs to change too. So that's been a massive culture shock that's prodded us in the last 3 years, and me to think about my work and how I support culture in a really different way. So let's keep going with the next slide. Okay, so well-being. So this is my well-being Venn. This is how I think about well-being. I think about health, wealth, and happiness being kind of interwoven, quite a dynamic Venn that, some of those circles might be more of a priority at other times than at other times. And for individuals, in fact, those circles on the Venn might be different sizes and shapes. But fundamentally, when I talk to teams or I think about well-being, I think about it as those three things. And interestingly, the kind of conversations that are coming up in the cultural space are more and more about well-being and how can this be the new cultural differentiator. I wrote a blog about 18 months ago about the bottom line business case around well-being. You'll probably know that Stephen Covey said that trust has a bottom line business case, and I think well-being does too. So again, a kind of a bit of a culture shock and a cultural prod that I am thinking about more and more on behalf of the people that I serve and do some work with. So, when we think about well-being, it's quite a depressing global picture. Just 1 in 4 of us, or 25% of us, feels that our employees care about our overall well-being. And that's from Gallup's Culture Shock book, which is a really fascinating data-driven book on the state of kind of culture globally. It's the usual chirpy message from Gallup. They do like to peddle a bit of gloom, but there's some really interesting stats in there about, when we achieve that state of well-being, what the benefits are. So we're much more likely to feel engaged at work. We're much more likely to look for another job or leave or retreat. We're much more likely to advocate for the firm, and so on and so on. So well-being isn't fluff. It's something that, we really need to give some thought to. And there is some real practical steps that we can build into our culture to make it positive and sustainable for employees, the community, and the business. So if you're not thinking about well-being, or if you've got a fairly flimsy view of what well-being is, it's really worth digging into. And certainly for your organization and the folks that you're serving, it's really worth thinking about how do we build that into our experience. So quite new thinking for me on well-being. Let's keep going. So I thought I'd share this slide with you. I know it's super busy and there's a lot to read, and we'll make sure we share these afterwards. But I did say today that I would share some of my reflections and maybe some of the work that I'm really pondering at the moment, and some of the new approaches that I'm taking to supporting the work that I'm doing. So this is a page from the course material from Peter Block's Leader as Convener, which I joined this year. It was an exceptional training program, really worth looking at Peter Block's bigger canon of work, starting with flawless consulting through to whatever the question is, the answer is yes, to stewardship, to his latest body of work, which is called Activating the Common Good, where Peter really talks about it's time for us to realize that change can come from relational activism, from the bottom up, and that we should probably stop looking at pillars of authority to solve this stuff for us, because, you know, employee engagement has never been so low. We're going to move on in a minute to look at trust and why trust is at an all-time low. So whatever we are doing collectively is not working. So Peter offers a really interesting view of the dominant narrative, the way that we tend to work when we think about culture and employee experience and kind of workplace behavior. And, you know, all that stuff is listed on the left-hand side. And I'm not going to read those out, but, you know, fundamentally a leader's job is to help, it's to solve, is to have the answers, is to facilitate. Moving to an alternative, Peter offers an alternative, and I'm sharing that with you today. And the 3 points that I just put a red doodle around in the middle of the screen are some areas that I'm really kind of pondering and experimenting with myself. And again, I wanted to kind of offer with you how my work is moving on and the different things that I'm trying. So I've really been thinking about this point around people having a freedom to choose and to opt into a culture, and to participate in a way that they choose, not to mandate a particular culture and to kind of enforce that on people, even if you intend that to be really positive. And then I've talked about this kind of, you know, transactional analysis kind of lens of relationships at work, how the leader and, you know, I as a leader really start to generate adult to adult conversations, however they may be dotted with dissent or disagreement or whatever the opposite of harmony is, that we need to flush out those discussions and get kind of comfortable with uncomfortable stuff. And then I think finally, leaders being able to say and feeling reasonably confident, I'm not there with this yet, to say, you know, I don't know, I don't have all the answers, and be curious about what other people think. And really, you know, personally working on really sharpening up my questions so they're suitably ambiguous and personal, so that they really dig and delve for great answers. And really engaging others by digging for participation. So quite a challenging area for someone that's been in this work for 25 years, for really starting to think about how do I continue on my journey? How do I match my skill and motivation for a cultural landscape that's really, really shifting? So if you don't know Peter's work and Leader as Convener, I'd really recommend that you have a look. Yes, Flawless Consulting was his original piece of work, which is, I mean, really quite a seminal piece of work around consulting for good. So have a look at that. Really, really interesting stuff. Let's carry on. I've hinted at the next couple of slides. I wanted to share another resource and another reflection for the folks gathered today. So on the next slide, we can flick up to that, please. It's quite a depressing slide. So I wanted to put this in here as a kind of moment of sobriety, really. It's quite a tough read. So this is just one of 2 slides from Edelman's latest 2024 Trust Barometer. I'll share a link with the team that, you know, we'll forward it on. You can see that I've written about this on LinkedIn and various blogs. So this is a slightly depressing read, because it talks about 2023 and 2024's Global Trust Barometer League. So 28 different countries polled, multiple thousands of people surveyed over a 12-month period to really dig and delve into people's view of trust across a number of authorities, so science, mass media, neighbourhoods, their business and other businesses. And particularly in 2024 survey, they asked a lot of questions around innovation. So there were lots of questions around how people are feeling and how they trust things like GM foods, AI, different kinds of technology, and again, quite a depressing picture that people feel that these innovations and improvements are being done to people. People aren't being taken along on the journey. They're not sure the improvements that these types of technologies and innovations are really going to make to our world. So again, accidental behavior, we're developing great stuff, but people aren't coming on the journey. They don't necessarily trust what this stuff does. So the really depressing stuff here is right at the bottom of the 2024 column there. If we just, float our cursor around there, the UK sitting right at the bottom of that table. So 28 out of 28. Not great stuff. So, we might poke and prod at the rest of the world and some of the problems that are going on at the moment. But, if we're UK based, we really should be holding a mirror up. What can we do around this problem? Not a great picture. So if we think about COVID, we think about employee engagement, we think about trust, we're really at an all-time kind of low in terms of how engaged people feel, how that lack of belonging and positivity is really weaving its way through our day. So, if you've joined today because you have any stake in cultural improvements, employee experience, leadership, this is kind of really food for thought in terms of what your contribution can be. So next slide is just one more from the Edelman Trust Barometer. I will share the link. It's great reading. It's very rich. There's a lot of content. So trust. So this kind of topic of trust, and I'm assuming you're going to make that leap between engagement, trust, and performance in organizations in terms of that value chain. So we're looking at trust because it really does drive culture, how people belong, and how people and organizations perform. So across a different range of authorities, from scientists all the way through from teachers, my CEO, the government, and some media, trust is looking, particularly low. And actually, if we look at typical sources of trust and authority, those kind of areas down the kind of bottom right, we haven't got a particularly good view of how they're doing. Interestingly, we are more likely to trust citizens of our own country and our neighbours than what journalists are telling us. So are we truly in the age of influencers? Are we truly on the cusp of moving back to valuing our community? Is it both of those? Is it either of those? Scientists, luckily we still believe scientists, but in the broader detail in the Edelman Trust Barometer, again, if we look at some of those innovations, AI, GM foods, etc., we're really not sure that these are doing great things for us. So I think, one of the questions here is, if you are a business leader, if you are a citizen or a neighbour, what part have you got to play in building a great culture in the places that you live and work? And to me, the realization that I've kind of come to is I've got a pretty big stake in this. So how can I use my paid professional developed skills over the last 25 years and turn my view more into my community? And I think that's what led me really to look at Peter Block's work. What can I do in my own community? How can I build some relationships, some relational activism? So, for example, my community can start to think about climate change, how it can start to think about the impact the impact of carbon living in a rural coastal community. What can we do around influencing some of the re-levelling funds that are finding their way from central government in London to the northeast? It's finally percolating up. What's our stake in this? So a bit of kind of food for thought there on again, what's happening with trust and what we might do to improve this. So let's keep going. Just a couple more slides. So um, that's a doodle of me there. Look in a purple jumper, holding my grandson Roman. He has indeed got a Bowie zigzag on his t-shirt. I am Bowie obsessed. There's probably a poster behind with him on. But my onward journey. So I've been, you know, successful in my career. I've had a lot of love, a lot of luck, great assignments. I've met and worked with brilliant people, and I've done a great job in a number of organizations impacting culture. But now in this last part of my career, I'm really starting to think about um, how do I change my playbook? How do I respond to what's happening in the broader environment? How can I be a source for good? What can I do to work in my community as well as, in my kind of professional job? And what can I do to shift to be a leader, from a leader to a convener? What can I do to shift the power in the room, to have people heard, to create a more participatory approach? So some of the things that I'm experimenting with are reframing problems as possibilities. And again, maybe a follow-up session, or if anybody wants to talk to me about this, there's a really great exercise where you start to think about a problem in your workplace or your community, and start to think about how would I reframe that as a possibility. And interestingly, once you reframe problems or deficiencies as possibilities, people become much more interested, much more creative, and much more willing to have a go. So we as a group were talking about a problem with pay in an organization. So we shifted the problem from, how do we tackle pay equality here, which just feels like a massive but pressing problem. And we turned that into a possibility. So we reframed it along the lines of, what would it look like here if reward was fair and transparent? Completely changed that. And, people's hearts lifted, people's heads lifted. The interest was just completely different. We are wired for solving problems in this way. So how do we reframe problems as possibility? And I've been spending quite a lot of time thinking about this, not least in my community. Um, the global community, the coastal community that I live in the Northeast, I live in a community that's missed out on millions and millions of pounds of funding. It's as simple as that. It's in black and white. We've failed to get successful bids for funding. And on each of the pieces of feedback for those pitches and those failed bids, it says something quite similar. It says that this community singularly fails to collaborate. That's so depressing. That's something that I really want to make a difference. Just by having voices heard, by collaborating, we would have more resources and be able to help solve some of our own problems. Giving choice, definitely the old, the kind of younger version of me, the pre-COVID version of me would work really hard to make sure that people had buy-in, and maybe using some coercion in there. Marketing people, selling them the dream, telling them that everything was going to be great, generating a great project. Now I give people choice, and I'm becoming more comfortable with inviting people in and having dissent and disagreement in the room. Um, you know, it's really interesting when you start to hear those voices percolate up, and you really, get to the problem much more quickly. And I don't think that we're particularly skilled at critical thinking. I don't think that we're particularly skilled at listening to dissent and dealing with disagreement. So that's a real area of practice for me, and one that I've observed that collectively, as people that are interested in cultural change and leadership, we're not skilled in. So I've talked about that. Shifting the power of control from me. So, you go into an engagement, you want to help change culture, build a culture. you also want it to be sustainable, but how much of it is really built around your own bias and your own views? So I'm really starting to think about, different approaches to have my voice, ironically, I've talked at you for half an hour, but to have my voice to be, the least loudest in the room. And, some other things here, seeing allies everywhere. I've really started to think about the ally movement when we start to think about marginalized communities, unpacking the patriarchy, and really starting to think about inviting allies in to help me think about unpacking and dismantling things, improving facilitation skills, using my skills in the community. And then finally, it might seem a really odd thing to say, but, I've been practicing saying no so that my yes means more. Really, a really, really interesting one. Maybe as a follow-up, we do something for half an hour and we have some kind of breakout groups. I'd really like to hear your voices and unpack some of these questions. So final slide, I think, for today is some kind of thoughts for you. I think actually I might just have one more after this one. So let's just scroll on to this nice schematic. So I did want to offer you something that I've been playing with really successfully for a couple of years. So if we go back to, the day job and helping people set out their stall, and maybe you're a startup or a scale up when you really want to think about, setting your compass or building a positive culture in a really intentional way. I quite often use this culture canvas. So this is from Fearless Culture. This is Gus Rossetti's work. So Gus is up until really recently was Chicago based, but I know he's just relocated, I think to Florida actually, somewhere interesting. But this is a really nice starting point if you don't know the culture canvas. So it gives you an opportunity as a team to either the culture that you experience now, broken down into these behavioral and kind of logical boxes. So it allows you to think about process and behavior. So you can map where you are now, you can map where you want to be. So you can use this as both a map and a compass. I've used this with more organizations than I'd like to count, always successfully, sometimes more slowly, sometimes more iteratively, but it always flushes out the reality of what the expectation is in this kind of team and workplace. It's a dynamic living document. You should use it regularly to review where you are, where you still need to get to. But it's a really cool tool. Again, if you want to read more about this, just Google Culture Canvas or look on Gus's website. There are brilliant examples of this filled in for people like Pixar, Southwest Airlines, who are my absolute favorite servant leader organizations, and some really, really interesting people on there that state in quite different ways what they're trying to get to in terms of their culture. So the reason for sharing this was I wanted to give you another tool. I've got input of the strengths. So I always like to offer a resource, and there's something practical that you could use following this to map where you are and kind of see where the gaps. And then, okay, so then just a little quote and then some questions for you to take away. So I love this quote. It's interesting that we've started to use the word snowflake in a derogatory way, but no snowflake in an avalanche ever feels responsible. We are all responsible for the culture and experience of people around us, all of us. And I've actually been reading a little bit about learned helplessness as well, whether in bigger organizations we've just learned to look up and expect somebody to solve this for us. So my questions for you on the final slide are, what role will you play in thinking about culture in a renewed, different, or energized way? So these are some questions really from my own reflections that have helped my own practice for this year. So this is quite fresh stuff. So thinking about, a problem that you face in your workplace or your team or your community, something that's a common narrative, something that people always say about here. It's too hard to change. We've always done things this way. It's a hierarchy. It's slow, whatever that kind of derogatory thing is. Have a think about what your contribution is to that problem. How are you keeping that in place? It's a really, really interesting question by not speaking up, by giving up, by expecting somebody else to solve it, by not even thinking about it. What can you do to help solve that problem? How can that problem be positioned as a possibility? So, oh, crikey, it's always really slow to get things done here, and keeping on with that narrative that drags people down and pulls you to scarcity from abundance. How can you talk about that in a different way? What would it look like if we applied the appropriate pace here? Different question. Third one, then, what am I prepared to give up in improving this situation that I've talked about? So, things are always slow here. There's a hierarchy. Have I got a vested interest in keeping it this way? Do I keep power, control, knowledge, resources, pay, reward, position, ego? Really great one to think about when you are poking a problem and thinking about your contribution. What doubts and reservations do I have about this piece of change? What am I still curious about? And again, that no question. There's something in that organization or circle that you're in that the unspoken no, maybe it's time to say so. And then finally, who are you waiting to solve this problem for you on your behalf? So, closing the circle, having spent 25 plus years working in culture in terms of building it, supporting it, rejigging it, affecting it, I've really come to this place now where I'm thinking about culture and leadership and employee experience in quite a new, fresh way. And I have to say it's quite exciting. And I'm really starting to think about, how I can participate and bring more voices together. So I would like to say thank you for bearing with us with all those technical glitches. Thank you for being talked at for half an hour or so. It wasn't my intention to rattle on at you. I do hope there's some provocations in there around culture, what it means, what we're facing. But I think, even above my own reflections and lessons, I hope you go away with some renewed questions around what you might do differently, some different conversations, and that, you can make a change by being intentional. So that was everything that I wanted to say today, quite quickly, because we lost about 15 minutes to my technical incompetence. But I hope, Nadar, that's been of some use to the people gathered today.
Thank you, Angie. I think it was mostly my incompetence that caused those delays, but thank you for bearing with me, and thanks for carrying on and running the session really well. So I don't know whether we got questions that anybody wants to ask. There's some observations and some
Yeah,
comments
let's see
that
what we've
we've
got.
got. And I don't know whether Tony's still on the call or he's gone.
Oh, is Tony been with us? Let's have a look then.
Yeah,
So Talia's been lovely. I can see her popping up all the way through,
yeah,
popping in lovely things. She reminds us that Brené Brown talks about vulnerability. Great to see the team has reminded people around Peter Block's work.
yeah,
I'll post a few things to you, Nadar, to share with people
yeah. We'll share
today.
it all.
Yeah, and I'll put some stuff in LinkedIn, and it maybe it doesn't go without saying, but reach out to me if anything you want to chat about. If you're
Absolutely.
experimenting, you've got a different perspective, I'd love to learn from you. And yeah, I can't see anything else in there,
No,
but you know where I am, and thanks for having me.
thank you, Angie. It was really lovely to have you on the webinar. Apologies for the false
Oh,
start.
don't worry.
Uh, I um, I learned quite a bit, and actually, I like the reframing part of it, and thinking about the organizations I'm with and what I do, and sort of, I like the say no more, therefore the
Yeah,
less counts. That's quite interesting. Peter Block is somebody I actually about a couple of weeks ago, because I read his Flawless Consulting back in 2002-ish, maybe even before, the green cover book.
yeah.
Now he's got a new one, so I need to reread that one
I'm
because
gonna
I
find where I
recommended.
put it. Where is it? Hang on. I'll show you the latest one. So this is the latest one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's it. Yeah. So activating the common good. Okay, yes, I need to look at that as well. And yeah, so I remember when I read his book many years ago, it had an impact on me. So I will reread it again and activating the common good as well. Thank you again very much for your time. I appreciate it. Thanks for sharing your learning, your journey freely with all of us. And thanks for the canvas and the questions for us to ponder on, which I will ponder on. Not all of them, but I certainly will take 3 or 4 of them because they were quite resonating to say, hey, what's
Mhm.
my role in it? What am I not doing that is sustaining this setup?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. What am I doing to sustain this? And I think that's just a great takeaway question. You know, what's my part in this? Things have got to change. Um, we can't look upward to the,
Yeah,
to the typical places to solve it because they're not. It's going backwards. So we've
yeah.
got to take control ourselves.
Thank you.
Right, I'm going to go. Thanks for having
See you
me.
soon. Bye for
See you
now.
later. Bye.
Bye bye. Thank you, Natalia. Thanks for your engagement and joining us. Bye for now. Vi kör